All right, so let's look at Numbers chapter 20. Much of the Bible is undated. What we mean by that is we're not told in year such and such of the wilderness wandering, so we don't know exactly when all this happened. But Numbers 20 appears to be a dividing line where, remember, everyone had been told if you're over 20, you're going to die in the wilderness. And so that generation is now beginning to die off. The next generation is coming up. And what's the biggest challenge with the upcoming generation? They did not witness the plagues, the Red Sea. They didn't see any of that. To them, manna is not miraculous. That's all they've ever known. They haven't known anything else. I cannot imagine being like 25 and the only thing you've ever eaten your whole life is manna. I mean, look, there's stuff I love barbecue pork ribs. I mean, that's number one at the top of the list. But man, as much as I love them, I'm not sure I want them for breakfast, lunch, and supper every single day. I mean, for a couple of weeks, it'd be awesome. But, at some point, you want a little variety. I mean, throw some fried chicken or something. And so we kind of are now approaching the end of the wilderness time and the getting ready to move into the land. And there are going to be some issues, of course, that arise with that. And we'll see one of them here. So chapter 20 begins, the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month. The people stayed in Kadesh. Now this is really interesting. I don't know why it says the whole congregation. Like, why wouldn't it be all of them? They're not traveling in 3 different packs. I mean, I don't know why it says the whole congregation. But it does. So they all come into the wilderness of Zin and they stayed in Kadesh. So, and come on, there it is. Okay, so this is Kadesh. So the wilderness of Zin's on the northeastern side of the Sinai Peninsula. So they're in that area. And Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation. Does something seem off here to you? We got there and Miriam died, we buried her, and then we move on. Now, this is just someone who died. And it's not even someone that was a leader that died. This is Moses' sister. And Moses says to his sister, yeah, we died and we buried her. And then he just moves on. It just seems, I don't know, cold's not the right word, but it seems kind of, you think there will be a little bit more about his sister. She's the one that kind of responded back and forth with Moses in Exodus 15. Matter of fact, it's called the Song of Miriam. As they celebrate the crossing of the Red Sea. And so Miriam's been very significant. Remember, she's the one that watched over the ark, the little basket he was floating in the Nile River. And when Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses, she says, I know a lady that'll nurse him, and took him to his own mom and all that other stuff. So Miriam's been very impactful in the life of Moses. And it's just kind of interesting that this is sort of, we're just told that she dies. I would have expected like some kind of eulogy or something, but that's all we have. So there was no water for the congregation. There's nothing about that doesn't make sense. They're in the desert, the wilderness. So I double checked today. There is about a 2 to 4 inch average of rain in this part of the world per year. We know exactly what that's like. Not this year, but we know pretty much what that's like. And so it makes sense there's no water. So what do? They pray. No, they don't. They do what most people do. They gather themselves against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. The word grumble is a very, very technical term. It's actually the Hebrew word for a lawsuit. And so Micah uses this word a lot. One of the most famous chapters of the Bible is Micah 6. He's showing you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, but do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. You see that on a lot of people's bumper stickers or windows or whatever. And that whole passage is a lawsuit. he uses this particular word over and over and over again. So the people are basically wanting to file a lawsuit against Moses and Aaron, so they would have made good Americans. Because that's the new American dream, to hit the big lawsuit. Now, what does it mean, would that we have perished when our brothers perished before the Lord? There have been a couple of times that they have died, but this may be in reference to when the earth opened up and swallowed up the people that had followed Korah, or it may just be a generic reference to people that have died as they've been spent all this time in the wilderness. He says, it'd be better if we had just died. So it says, why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? The biggest problem here is this is a statement that we don't believe the promise of God. God has promised them that he's going to take them into the land. God has promised them that, about their descendants will be like the stars of the skies and the sands of heaven, all that kind of stuff. But they don't believe the promises of God. And look, the reality is, when things are going really bad, sometimes it is hard to think about the promises of God. We'd rather complain. And all of us are guilty of that. He said, and why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? Now the ESV uses the word evil. It's fascinating in the Old Testament. There is no word for evil. There's one word, and it covers all the negatives. So if you got a bad batch of popcorn, that's the same word as morally evil. It just means whatever kind of bad. And so there's one word covers the whole thing. And so here, obviously, the bad is far worse than a bad bag of popcorn that you left in the microwave too long, kind of thing. It says it's really like, and this is a place that's looking to kill us. Why have you brought us here? I do find it interesting as well. They don't say, why'd you bring us here? They say, why'd you bring us out of Egypt? Implying, boy, it was better in Egypt. It's always fascinating how we forget the negatives of the past sometimes, and we try to make it look so wonderful. Like it was great and fantastic. And don't you remember back? And we kind of pine for those days again. They weren't as great as you remember them. Trust me, they were not. Some of you have been on this earth long enough that you wore a polyester leisure suit. Don't tell me about the good old days. If you were within 5 feet of an open flame, you were endangering your life. It's like, and some of you drove a Pinto. Or you drove a Chevy Vega. The first time I ever pulled up to Jerry's house when we first started dating, I can't make this up. There was a Ford Pinto and a Chevy Vega in the driveway. One was hers and one was her sister's. The worst car that Ford ever made and the worst car that Chevy ever made, sitting side by side in the driveway. Her Vega was so underpowered that if she had a couple other people with her and going up a pretty steep hill, they would have to get out. She could take like one to the top of the hill and come back and get the next one. Like it wouldn't take 4 people up the hill. So don't tell me about the good old days. That story's funny now, but at the time, when you're the one standing on the side of the road watching this car smoke as it goes up the hill, it doesn't. So the good old days weren't always the good old days. There was no Netflix. There was no streaming. There was no, hey, let's see where the next gas station is. Oh, I need to book a motel reservation. There was none of that. If you didn't have the cash, you didn't eat. There's no plastic. And then do you remember when they did have the plastic on the machines? How many of y'all remember the machines? And what did you do? I'd like the carbon, please. Because you don't want anybody to get your number. I think, don't tell me about the good old days. And because the other was good, but it's not as great as you think. And Egypt, though they were slaves, was not as bad as it could have been. It was bad. They moaned and they groaned, but there were probably some good days too. And by this point, all they're remembering is the good days. Not all the horribleness of being. By the way, you know what the worst part of being a slave in Egypt was? There's never a day off. There's no break. There's no relief. And when things are bad, oftentimes what we want is just a break. Just if I could just have, how many people do you know that have been sitting in a hospital room for days on end and someone comes and relieves them even for an hour, and just having a little bit of a break. And when you're a slave, there's no break. It's unending. There's no catch my breath. It is just all day, every day. And when you think about that, think about how great it was to hear you're only going to work 6 days a week and you're going to take a day off the Sabbath. To people who've never had a day off their whole life. How liberating that was and should have been and should be for us. So, man, all they remember is the good stuff in Egypt, of which there wasn't a whole lot. But, man, you brought us out of there. It's no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink. Now, what do you have to do if you're going to be able to harvest grain, figs, vines, and pomegranates? You have to live there for a while. Now, we think of when I grew up, this was the picture I had. Every day they had to pick up their tent and go somewhere and redo the tent every day. Oh, that'd be brutal. That would be brutal. No wonder you live for the Sabbath, because that's the one day that God wouldn't make you move your tent. But that's not the case. They would spend years at a location. And then the cloud would move, they would move, they'd spend years as well. It's like, we've lived here in some of these places for a long time, and if there was water, then we could have grown grain, and we could have planted fig trees, and we could have had vines, we could have had pomegranates, and it would have just been so wonderful. But yeah, there's no water for that. Oh, by the way, there's not even enough water to drink. So you can hear them, just how unhappy they are. So Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. The glory of the Lord appeared to them. So this is one of those places that the Bible just kind of blows right through it. But I have questions. How do Moses and Aaron go leave the presence? Do they say nothing and just try and walk off? Do they, give me just a minute. We understand. We're going to go talk to the Lord about this, which you should have done already. I don't know how it just says, and they left them. But it makes you kind of wonder, sometimes the best thing to do is just turn out and walk away. Or to give a very, the Bible says that a soft answer turns away wrath. And so I don't know how they did, but it is kind of interesting. It just says they just left them. They go to the tent of meeting. And I wonder what, just common Israelite out there is thinking. They've really gone off on Moses and whether he said something or not, and he's left. And then they see this pillar of cloud, bright and shining, descend right on the tent where Moses is. And they know that Moses is talking to God face to face, and they think, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have been so upset. Like Moses is meeting with God face to face. And the last time we complained, it didn't go well. I wonder how many of this point thinking, uh-oh. I believe the Bible. I believe the Bible teaches spanking. There's no other way around that. You may disagree with it, but the Bible clearly does. Beat your son with a rod, he won't die. It's one of my favorite verses in all of Proverbs that I quoted my children many, many times. So we did the whole wooden spoon thing. Worked pretty well. It leaves a sting, but doesn't create any kind of physical damage. I don't believe in child abuse. And I don't believe in getting angry and swatting your kids. That's not spanking. Spanking is as planned and intentional. And then someone gave us a paddle. Yep. I've received interesting gifts over the years as pastor. That would be one of the more interesting. I have something for you. It's a beautiful oak. It was gorgeous, and it was right. Then it disappeared. It's disappeared. And when you have 4 children, everyone has the same answer. It's the same 2-word answer, which is not me. That's exactly right. We had a pretty good idea because we knew our kids' personalities of which children would be more likely than not to do that. And it was missing for, probably 10 years. And when we moved a couple years ago, we found it buried behind everything in the back of a storage closet. And then one of our children confessed because by then they were all married and moved out. And I figured they probably thought it was safe to confess. But before the paddle was mysteriously disappeared. If they saw you go and get the paddle, they knew this is not going to end well. And when they see the glory of the Lord descend on the tent where Moses is, I'm sure they're thinking, this is not going to end well. For lack of a better description, God's going to hand Moses the paddle. And so I was kind of wondering what the response must have been like. So the Lord spoke to Moses saying, take the staff, that's the big stick that Charlton Heston carries. Take the staff, assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. So I find it interesting. He does not say tell a rock, but it is the rock. It is a specific rock. And if you're wondering, I am a Hebrew professor. I checked in Hebrew, the is there. It is the rock. Like it is a specific rock. It's not the normal word for rock. So what rock is it? Well, in Exodus chapter 17, so in Exodus 17:6, God says, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And they call the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel. So Paul will tell us in 1 Corinthians that this was the rock that followed them. And so that may have been this rock. It's actually the word for a smaller rock. Not like a big mountain of granite, but just maybe one that possibly been carried. But it's a specific rock. Tell it to the rock to yield its water, so bring water out of the rock. And so, verse 9, Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Verse 10, Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. Some of you are thinking the actor. No, this is like a rock. For the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels. The word rebels is used 44 times in the Old Testament. 41 of them are rebellion against God. So this is almost always classed as an angry rebellion against God. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? I'll be honest with you, Moses ain't going to squeeze a single drop of water out of that rock. He's just a vessel for God to use. Because the stick ain't going to do it either. So that's one of the issues that's going to arise out of this. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? By the way, did God tell him to call them a bunch of rebels? No. But let's not look too badly on Moses. Everyone has their point. And their breaking point. And Moses is past his. They've pushed him too far. He's just had enough. And I can get that. So Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly. Gushing out. The congregation drank and their livestock. I've heard a lot of people, I've heard some weird ideas about this. Well, Moses struck it and says, speak to it. Okay, but the reality is, the last time this happened, God told him to strike the rock. We just read it in Exodus 17. So I'm not sure I don't think that's the problem. I heard one bizarre guy, the really weird stuff I seem to remember because I'm thinking, well, how could you forget it? Because it's so weird. I heard a guy explain that the rock is Jesus, and the problem is he struck it twice, and you can't crucify Jesus twice. Yeah, that's pretty much my same response. I'm like, okay. And usually one of two things happens in those moments. I either get a tap on the leg that means be quiet, or I get you don't think that, do you? And it's, no, I don't. We'll talk about it in the car ride home. So at that point, Jerry can feel my bodily response to these things, and she knows I better stop him before he embarrasses the guy and himself and me. That one probably was a tap on the leg. But that's not what this is. In fact, to be honest with you, it says really nothing to do with striking the rock versus speaking to the rock. And the reason is because God tells us what Moses has done wrong. Verse 12, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me, Does anybody know the Hebrew word for believe? Amen. Because you didn't amen me. It means to recognize God as firm and secure, something you build your life on. Because you did not amen me. To uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel. In other words, the problem is Moses has claimed some credit for bringing the water from the rock. And God does not share his glory with another. And so Moses is taking something. God said, because you did that, what's going to happen? You will not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. I'll read verse 13. We'll talk about why this penalty. These are the waters of Meribah, which means to grumble, quarrel, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord. And through them, he showed himself holy. So I find it interesting that he says, you did not uphold me as holy, but God showed himself holy to the people, because they don't know the conversation between Moses and God and all of that. All they know is that God has provided them water through Moses striking the rock. Let's be honest. This sure does seem like a harsh punishment. This is the dude who stood face to face and toe to toe with the most powerful man, who is king of the most powerful empire, toe to toe with Pharaoh over Egypt, and won. This is the guy who listened to people. Do you think there was any indication they were grumblers when right off the bat Pharaoh says no straw for the brick and the people grumbled against Moses? It's kind of a sign of things to come. And they've grumbled at every turn. They've complained over and over and over again. They've wanted to get rid of Aaron and replace him with someone else as a priest. And I don't blame Moses for getting upset here. Remember, I kind of admire the guy. He made it about 40 chapters longer than I would have. And so it's actually pretty impressive. But it seems like a pretty harsh, this is Moses. Why is this? The reason for this is because Moses is a leader and they're held to a higher standard. And the reason is because people, by the way, it always cracks me up where all these crazy definitions of leaders. Yeah. Do you know what a leader is? Someone that has followers. But nobody likes that definition. They like something, it's influence. No, that's an influencer. They're not a leader. They're influencers all over the internet. They don't do anything to me. But a leader it's something that people follow. Man, Moses is a leader. But the issue is then when you do something like this, it has far more ramifications than just someone else out there. And so, Moses is he says, man, you're not going to get to go in. I do find it humorous if you read Deuteronomy several times. Moses said, y'all made me angry and God told me I couldn't go in. It's like, man, he remembers it's y'all's fault. He doesn't let it go. In Deuteronomy several times, you provoked me, he says, the waters of Meribah. So we're done with that. That's it. And again, these are the memoirs of Moses, and he's got to get them on one scroll. So there's no time for fluff and other such stuff. We just got to move on to the next thing that happens. So, verse 14, Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the kingdom of Edom. So, Edom is, here we go. Yes, it's the little orangish splotch over there. It's about 50 miles. No big deal for us. But when you go on foot, or horseback or camelback, 50 miles is a long way. Trust me, I know. I take people hiking. 3 miles is a long way for some people. Even adults, first time I take them hiking the Grand Canyon, like little kids, are we there yet? How much further? And it's like, we're not even halfway out yet. I should maybe be more gracious, but I'm like, we got a long way to go. Don't even think about it. I figure if I keep telling them that, then when suddenly we hit the rim, it's like, kind of thing. My kids were young, say, how much further? 100 miles. 100 miles. 1,350 miles from here to my parents' house. 100 miles. 100 miles. How much longer? Hours. Hours, just, when my wife would ask, I would have to give her a real answer. But anyway, so that's Edom. So it goes over there. So this is what's important about knowing where they are. If they're in Kadesh, where would you go to get into the land? Straight north, exactly. You just go straight up. I mean, they're south of the land, so they're in the I don't know if this pointer works well. They're in where the little red rectangle is. That's Kadesh. That's where they're at. You just go straight up to the land. Well, why don't they? Why don't they? Because the last time they were at Kadesh, they went up. They sent some spies in, and the spies came back, and two said, actually, all 12 of them said, "We can't take the land. Big city's full of giants." 10 said, "Let's give up." And 2 said, "We can't take it, but God can. Let's go." So Caleb and Joshua, so because the people believed the 10 spies rather than Caleb and Joshua, they just spent 40 years in the wilderness. So I think Moses is thinking, I ain't spending another 40 years out here. We're not going to go that way this time. We're going to take a different route. We're going to go a different direction. So that's probably the reason that they're now going to, he's thinking, let's go to the east and up, and then we'll cross back in on the north side of the Dead Sea. So that's the way that they're going to go. So he sends this message, "Thus says your brother Israel." Now, why in the world would he send to Edom your brother Israel? Does anybody know who the founder of Edom was? Esau. Esau founded Edom. And so who was Esau's brother? Jacob, whose name was changed at the brook Penuel to Israel. So that's why he says, your brother. They're, by this point, after several hundred years, they're distant cousins, but they're still cousins. And so, to put it in modern terminology, hey, cuz. So that's why he calls you your brother Israel. You know all the hardship that we have met. How our fathers went down to Egypt, and we lived in Egypt a long time. And the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and our fathers. By the way, the word dealt harshly is the same word for this is an evil land. They dealt evil with us and our fathers. And when we cried to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel and brought us out of Egypt. And here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your territory. Please let us pass through your land. We will not pass through field or vineyard or drink water from a well. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. So there were three main ways that you would travel through. This is a road map of ancient Israel, basically. So there's the coastal road. I guess that makes sense to go up along the plains, also known as the Way of the Philistines. Then there was the main path people used that went right up through the central part of the land. And then there was one on the east side of the Jordan River. It's in red here, and that's called the King's Highway. And the King's Highway goes right through Edom and actually goes all the way up to Damascus in Syria. So I said, we're just going to, let me put it in, we're not going to take any exits. We're going to stay on the interstate until we get through your territory. We're not going to hit a Circle K. We're not going to stop at McDonald's. Man, I'm telling you, we're just going to drive through. That's all we're going to do. We're not going to stop anywhere. That's basically what he says. And so what does Edom do? Nope. But Edom said to him, I'm sorry, every time I read this, you shall not pass. My mind immediately goes to the Lord of the Rings. I can't help it. I'm just all messed up like that. Last night, I teach every other Tuesday night, teach preaching this semester, and I was talking with the students after class, and that different reading, he said, I'm just thrilled to know there's a professor that reads fantasy literature that actually knows the Inheritance series. I'm like, oh yeah, I read Aragon 4 times, the whole series. And of course, obviously I read Lord of the Rings numerous times, and all the Sword of Shannara books and all that stuff. Do any of y'all read that kind of, yes, we have a few redeemed folks here. So he says, you will not, again, I'm saying, I read, you shall not pass. So anyway, you will not pass through, lest I come out with sword against you. And the people of Israel said to him, so they repeat their request or their information. Now, we'll go up by the highway. If we drink of your water, I and my livestock, I'll pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more. Edom doesn't know their intentions, but But he said, you will not pass through. And Edom came out against them with a large army and with a strong force. So, how many people in Israel have ever fought a battle at this point in history? 0 as Israelites. Some of them may have been conscripted at some point, some of the older ones, when they were in Egypt and forced to go into war, or at least to help carry stuff for the soldiers all. But the reality is none of them have been trained as fighters. So when they see a large army and a strong force, they know that they're going to be overwhelmed, left to themselves. But God's going to fight for them. However, they don't engage them. Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory, so Israel turned away from him. So in Deuteronomy chapter 2, we get a little bit of an explanation about why they did not fight Edom, why they turned away. So in Deuteronomy chapter 2, we'll just pick up verse 4. And command the people, you're about to pass through the territory of your brothers, the people of Esau, who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you, so be very careful. Do not contend with them, for I will not give you any of their land. No, not so much as for the sole of the foot to tread on, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. So basically, Moses tells us in Deuteronomy, as he recounts some of the events from the book of Numbers, hey, look, God gave them this place. God gave Jacob a land. He gave Esau land. And you're not to fight with them because you're not going to inherit their land. So this isn't cowardice. This is a part of God's plan because of the promise that was made to Edom. And so they're totally going. Now I just want to say a couple things about Edom that are interesting. Have any of y'all ever seen like pictures of Petra? The city that's cut off. Have you ever seen one of the Indiana Jones movies where they have to find the place that's in the crescent moon dealie? That's actually Petra. And it's a city cut into a rock, into the red rock. And that is... So if you look right in the little gold splotch, you'll see Petra's right at the very bottom of that. Petra was in Edom. Seir is a mountain that's about in the middle of Edom. Edom is actually known. Why is rock red? It's because of the iron that's in it. The iron makes it rusty looking, red looking. So Edom has a lot of iron ore. And the Bible talks, when God wants to punish Edom, sometimes he'll say, I'm going to put you through the smelter because they smelted iron. And what they did was they took the rock and they dug out these big bowls basically in the rock. And it's really easy for archaeologists to uncover it. Once you've dug a hole in the rock, it tends to still be there. And so I found quite a few of them. The other thing they were known for was laundry. And that's important because one of the punishments that's mentioned a couple of times against Edom is, you will be my wash basin. So he took something they were familiar with. And so that makes sense. Would it make any sense if God said to them, you'll be my asteroid? God's punishments have a tendency to connect with something we're familiar with. And by the way, God's punishments have a tendency to oftentimes connect with what we're the proudest of. That's what God will take down. Probably the best example is John chapter 3. Not verse 16, but at the very beginning of the chapter. How does it begin? There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus who came to Jesus by night. And what does he ask Jesus? How can I be saved? And Jesus says, what? You must be born again. Now, why did he tell Nicodemus you have to be born again? What has Nicodemus heard his entire life? You're a descendant of Abraham. Your birth guarantees you heaven. You are one of God's people because you're a descendant of Abraham. More than that, you're a male descendant of Abraham. So his prayer every morning would have been, God, I thank you that I'm not a Gentile, a woman, or a dog. His prayer, not mine. Don't throw stones. I'm just telling you that's why that's what he's heard, is that you're a Jewish male, you're in. So Jesus hits him at the one thing that he thinks is going to get him in. And what does Jesus say? Dude, your birth stinks. You need a whole new, your genealogy means nothing. Your heritage means nothing. You need to be born again. And Nicodemus doesn't get it. He says, what, am I going to enter in my mother's womb a second time? If his mom was there, she's probably thinking, and so, and then, of course, Jesus has to go on and give him more explanation. Now, it's fascinating because that's John 3. Does anybody remember what happens in John chapter 4? Jesus tells the disciples, I have to go through Samaria. I have an appointment. And at the middle of the day at noon, Jesus goes to a well. And does anybody remember who he meets at the well? The woman at the well. That's what she's known as. And Jesus starts a conversation with her. It's fascinating. Jesus does not tell her she needs to be born again. Because what has a Samaritan woman heard her whole life? Your birth sucks. Too bad you weren't born someone else. Your birth leaves you on the outside. She's heard her whole life you need to be born again. So Jesus doesn't address her at that point. He finds another place to address her. Jesus has a way of knowing right where to hit us. And God does the same thing with Edom. Several places in the Bible, because of points of their pride, that's why he describes the punishment the way that he does. And the reality is when God wants to get your attention and mine, he has a tendency to hit us at our pride points. Because our bad spots, we know they're our bad spots. And what we need to learn is the things that we want to take pride in that really think make us all that and all that special, really don't. It's Jesus that makes us special, and he's the one that's supposed to get all the credit and glory. And of course, Moses had to learn that as well. So Miriam dies. Moses told, you're going to die before you get in the land. This is kind of a depressing chapter if you're part of that family from Amram and Jochebed. So in verse 22, what about Aaron? And well, he's going to die too. So they journeyed from Kadesh, the people of Israel, and the whole congregation, they came to Mount Hor. We don't know where this is. It is assumed that it's somewhere close to the border of Edom, maybe northwest side of Edom. And that the reason is because the next verse tells us that the Lord said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor on the border of the land of Edom, so they don't go in, but they're kind of moving up that way. Let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land that I have given to the people of Israel, because you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. Now this in some ways is kind of cool. How many people does God say, by the way, it's time for you to die and come home? But God tells Aaron it's time. And I wonder what Aaron thought about that. I don't know, I've been around, it's really interesting. I've been around a lot of people who were dying. I've been with people when they died. There are a lot of different ways it's dealt with. But I've always been amazed at how many believers are accepting of death. That's all right. Accepted of dying. Death has been conquered by the resurrection. There's no death for the people of God. We're still going to die our body, but there's no death. Death has been conquered by Christ. And maybe that distinction is why, some people think my family's morbid. Say, yeah, when we die. But I've got plenty of people to meet on the other side. And I got more who'll be joining me. So it's time. I love the phrase gathered to his people. Some people don't think the Old Testament teaches anything about the afterlife. It does not teach a whole lot. There are a few places, a couple in Daniel, a few others. It doesn't say a whole lot about the afterlife. But this is one of them. You're not gathered to your people if you just turn to dust. And the fact that God reveals himself as I am, he is the God of the living, not the dead. Even Jesus used that reference. So Aaron is not just going to die, but he's going to be gathered to those that have gone before him. And so that's good to know that you're gathered to your people, with your clan that's gone before you. Because he's not going to enter the land that I have given to the people of Israel. It fascinates me. I don't know why I find this so fascinating. And I've marked tons of places, the differences in the early chapters of the Bible. Sometimes God says, the land I'm giving to you. Because they're not there yet. They have not arrived yet. But other times God says, I've given it to you. It's already done. Because when God promised Abraham, it was a done deal. They just have not arrived at that point yet. And so when I was saved, heaven was a done deal. I haven't arrived at that point yet. But God has already given me heaven. I just haven't caught up to that promise yet. And I'm already declared completely sinless and righteous. Just in my life experience, I haven't caught up to that yet. And y'all are well over that, and you ain't caught up yet either. And so God said, I like this. He said, I've given it to you. Even though you're not going to see it, I've given it to you. And so he says, because you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah, take Aaron and Eleazar his son and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar his son, because Eleazar is going to be the one to inherit the position now of high priest. By the way, has anything like this ever happened later in the Bible? Elijah gives to Elisha his mantle, which is the sign that he is now going to take the place as the head prophet. And Aaron will be gathered to his people and shall die there. Moses did the Lord commanded. They went up Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. What's this like for Eleazar? To know I'm walking my dad to his death. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments. I assume they're far enough on the mountain or someplace where the whole congregation doesn't see Aaron stripped naked. I'm assuming that because they did go up the mountain in the sight of all the congregation. Stripped Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. We don't know any more about that. I assume that Moses and Eleazar piled some rocks over him, or found a crevice to put him in, or took a while and dug a hole for him, or whatever it was that they did. I don't know, but they've done something. Then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. So this is the answer to the first transition question. So what are the transition questions? Who's going to take Moses' place? Because at some point that's going to happen. Who's going to take Aaron's place? So now we have the answer to Aaron. That's Eleazar. He's going to be the chief priest. And who's going to take Moses' place? Say it with bold. This is what I tell my students. If I ask a question in class, don't you ever mumble an answer. You say it boldly. I'd rather you be boldly wrong than timidly right. And especially when I teach Hebrew. Like, can anybody parse this verb? I think it's a cow. So what? No, say it boldly. And after about 2 semesters in, they'll say it boldly. And many of them are still boldly wrong, but at least they're bold, and I appreciate that very much. So yes, it's Joshua. He's the one that's going to take Moses' place, because that's the other question. So the first significant transition question, because the only high priest they've ever known is Aaron. There's never been another one. The only leader they know is Moses. There's not been another. And so how do who's going to come next? And how are we going to transition? And so he has the stamp of Moses' approval and God's approval when he comes down the mountain with Moses. And when all the congregation saw that Aaron had perished, all the house of Israel wept for Aaron 30 days. Now, I don't know about you, but that is a long funeral. That is 30 days is a long, long funeral. There are actually a couple people, they mourn for them 40 days or more. But 30 days is a long funeral. How can you mourn for somebody for 30 days? Here is how. You're camped at the foot of Mount Hor. There's manna every morning. I don't know why it just struck me. I don't know why it struck me yesterday. I have an office at the seminary, and so I had an appointment up there with a couple of people, and I left the house a little later than I had originally intended, and I forgot to take my rain gear. Got about halfway there, and I thought, I didn't bring my rain gear. It's supposed to rain tonight. I was on 2 wheels, and so it was a long, wet ride home, which I didn't mind. 75 was really nice when I could see through the rain on my glasses. But on the way I was thinking, man, I need to get there. I got a point. And it struck me, boy, the clock is our master. We don't know how to move at any rhythm other than the clock. Got an appointment, got to be there. It starts at this time, it ends at that time. Most people when it comes to church are more concerned about the ending time than the starting time. George Burns said a great sermon has a good beginning and a good ending, and the two are as close together as possible. But I thought, and maybe it was because this was kind of on my mind, 30 days. They were not in a hurry. And sometimes I feel like I'm just always in a hurry. I've got the next appointment, the next meeting, the next assignment, the next thing I got to get done. When you're a pastor, Sunday comes around every 7 days. It's relentless. And it's it's the tyranny of the clock. And some of you who have retired, I've heard some retirees say, man, I don't know what to do. Because when you spend your whole life, it starts in kindergarten. Got to get to school on time. Then there's so much time for this, so much time for that, so much time for that. And then we got to get to piano lessons or soccer practice or whatever else it is. And there's always, and even on Saturdays, there's karate lessons at a certain time. And then there's a ball game at a certain time. And then we got to hear on Sundays. And then we got to get back for a Awana on Sunday nights. That's your whole life has been run that way. These people don't have that. And sometimes I don't know if I'm envious or not, because I don't know anything in life except, well, it's me. So running wide open is the only way because I'm have about an average energy level. I'm just always just going. It's kind of the way I know life. But I wonder what it's like to be able to stop for 30 days. But I think there also is an element of, I think we have a lot of people who struggle because they have not taken enough time to mourn. Your company gives you 2 days off, maybe a week off, and there's not enough time, and people have not finished mourning like maybe God has designed us to do. And so the 30 days, it kind of freaks me out because, again, we just run at a really high pace, but just think you need time to mourn. And maybe this would be better for us. Most companies probably can't afford to just give everybody 30 days off, but just to think about, the more time and just to kind of work through it all.